My name is Sarah. I am 32 years old, and the exact moment my older brother slammed the heavy oak door of our family home in my face, leaving me standing on the freezing porch with nothing but the clothes on my back and a crumpled $10 bill he had mockingly tossed at my feet, something inside me permanently shattered. The cold Chicago wind bit into my cheeks, but the physical chill was absolutely nothing compared to the pure ice in his eyes when he told me I was dead to him and had no claim to our father's legacy. He had just stolen my entire life, my inheritance, my sense of safety, all while smiling that arrogant, greedy smile. I stood there, shivering, gripping that pathetic $10 bill, wondering how the boy who used to protect me from monsters under the bed had become the monster himself. I thought my life was over, that he had won completely. But what neither of us knew at that agonizing moment was that this $10 bill would be the seed of his absolute destruction. And 5 years later, a single phone call from our family banker would change absolutely everything. Before I go back to the beginning and explain how things got so unimaginably dark, I want to ask you something quickly. Where are you listening to this story from? Drop your city or state in the comments, because I really love knowing how far my story is reaching and where you guys are located. It makes me feel connected to you all. Anyway, to understand the sheer cruelty of that night on the porch, you need to know about our family dynamics. We grew up in a very comfortable, middle-class neighborhood. My father, David, was 65 years old when he passed away, and he had spent his entire adult life building a highly successful chain of local hardware stores. He was a remarkably good man, hardworking to the bone, but maybe a little too trusting, especially when it came to his firstborn son, my brother Mark. Mark is 36 years old now, 4 years older than me, and he always walked around with a sickening sense of entitlement that my father was completely and tragically blind to. Mark was always the golden boy of the family. He played college football, went to a prestigious business school, and was groomed from day one to take over the company. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. I loved the stores, but I loved the people part of it. I worked the cash registers, managed the inventory in the back rooms, and knew every single regular customer by their first name. I had a very special bond, a quiet understanding of what the business meant to the community. But Mark absolutely hated that. He saw the family business as nothing more than his personal ATM, a kingdom he was destined to rule, not a community staple. He started making aggressive moves even before Dad got sick, slowly pushing out older, loyal employees and cutting corners on product quality just to maximize his own quarterly profit bonuses. I tried to warn my dad, but he just brushed it off. Then the unthinkable and devastating reality hit us. Dad suffered a massive heart attack. It was sudden, brutal, and completely derailed our entire lives. I spent every single day sitting by his hospital bed, holding his fragile hand, praying to any higher power for a miracle that simply never came. Mark, however, was rarely at the hospital. He claimed he was incredibly busy keeping the company afloat during the crisis, making sure the supply chains were intact. I later found out the heartbreaking truth. He was actually busy meeting with sleazy corporate lawyers and shady accountants behind our backs. When Dad finally passed away, my entire world collapsed inward. I was drowning in a sea of grief, barely able to breathe, let alone think about the future or legal documents. I blindly trusted Mark because he was my older brother. A week after the agonizing funeral, Mark called me into the main office at the flagship store. I honestly thought we were going to discuss the final memorial service details, or maybe how we would divide the workload now that Dad was permanently gone. Instead, he coldly slid a thick, intimidating stack of legal papers across the large mahogany desk. He had this completely detached, sociopathic look on his face. He flatly told me that Dad had left the entire business, all the commercial properties, and every single liquid asset solely to him. I was in absolute shock. Dad had always sworn, both publicly and privately, that we would be equal 50-50 partners. Mark smoothly claimed Dad changed his will in the hospital, suddenly realizing the business needed a single, strong leader to survive the modern market. I demanded to see the will immediately. When I read the document, the blood ran freezing cold in my veins. It was Dad's signature at the bottom, but it was incredibly shaky, almost entirely illegible. Mark had practically forced him to sign away his life's work while he was heavily medicated, confused, and actively dying in a hospital bed. I completely lost my mind right there in the office. I screamed at him, calling him a thief, a monster, a disgusting parasite who couldn't even let his own father die in peace without robbing him blind. I aggressively threatened to hire the best lawyer in the state, to take him to civil court, to expose exactly what he had done to the entire board of directors and all our loyal suppliers. But that was my fatal mistake. I showed my hand while I was completely powerless. Mark's facial expression didn't even twitch. He didn't yell back or defend himself. He just calmly picked up the desk phone and called the building's security team. He falsely told them I was having a severe mental breakdown and was aggressively trespassing on private property. He then looked at me with dead eyes and said that I had exactly 1 hour to pack my personal items from the family house because the house was legally in the company's name and I was officially terminated as an employee. Which brings us right back to that horrible, freezing night. He actually had a locksmith change the deadbolts while I was upstairs frantically gathering a few basic clothes into a cheap canvas duffel bag. When I walked out the front door, crying my eyes out, he locked it firmly behind me. He reached into his expensive tailored suit pocket, pulled out a single $10 bill, and threw it directly at my shoes. He sneered at me, telling me to buy a hot coffee so I could stay awake on the bus bench that night. I was too stunned, too emotionally broken to even physically fight back. I picked up the $10, picked up my heavy bag, and just started walking into the dark. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't let him see me completely shatter. I walked for hours until my feet were covered in painful blisters, the horrifying reality of my new homeless situation crashing down on my shoulders with every single step. I eventually ended up at a dingy, brightly lit 24-hour diner on the absolute worst edge of town. I sat in a sticky booth and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a plain black coffee, just so I could legally have a warm place to sit out of the wind. The night shift waitress, an incredibly sweet older woman named Brenda, 58 years old, with tired but kind eyes, immediately noticed my tear-stained, swollen face and the battered duffel bag resting on the floor. She didn't ask any intrusive or embarrassing questions. She just walked away and came back with a massive plate of hot pancakes, sliding it in front of me. She whispered that it was on the house and that I looked like I had survived a war. That tiny, unexpected act of human kindness completely broke my emotional dam. I rushed to the diner's bathroom and sobbed until my stomach cramped. I had lost my beloved dad, my childhood home, my only brother, and my entire financial future in a matter of a few torturous days. But sitting alone in that bathroom stall, looking at the pathetic remaining $7 and change from Mark's insulting handout, a tiny, hot spark of pure, unadulterated rage ignited deep in my chest. I made a solemn, unbreakable vow to myself right then and there. I was not going to fade away into nothingness. I was not going to be the pathetic, tragic victim of my brother's insatiable greed. I washed my face, walked back out, and straight up asked Brenda if the manager was hiring anyone for anything. She looked deeply surprised, but told me their night dishwasher had just quit without notice 2 days ago. It was minimum wage, physically grueling work, and the overnight hours were absolutely terrible, but I took the job immediately. For the next 8 months, that greasy diner kitchen was my entire universe. I slept on the lumpy, uncomfortable couch of a young coworker, a very sweet girl named Chloe, 22 years old, who took immense pity on my situation. My hands were constantly raw, bleeding and cracked from the scalding hot dishwater and harsh industrial chemicals. But every single dirty plate I forcefully scrubbed felt like a tiny step away from my brother's oppressive shadow. I didn't spend a single cent that I didn't absolutely have to survive. I bought my clothes from discount thrift store bins and ate the leftover free meals at the diner. I hoarded and saved every single tip, every single meager paycheck in a cheap shoebox under Chloe's couch. The physical labor was intensely exhausting, but it was the mental and emotional battle that was truly the hardest part of the journey. There were countless nights I would lie wide awake in the dark, staring blankly at the cracked ceiling, thinking about Mark comfortably sleeping in my dad's big warm bed. I pictured him arrogantly running the company my dad built from nothing, living the luxurious life that was maliciously stolen from me. The anger was a toxic poison in my veins, but I forced myself to learn how to use it as high-octane fuel instead of letting it kill me. I couldn't afford an expensive corporate lawyer to fight the forged will. So I realized I had to build my very own empire completely from scratch to ever get justice. I knew the local hardware and supply business inside and out. I knew exactly what the wholesale suppliers hated about dealing with big, soulless corporate chains, and I knew exactly what the local independent contractors actually needed to succeed. During my brief 15-minute smoke breaks at the diner, even though I didn't smoke, I started obsessively sketching out a detailed business plan on cheap paper napkins. I noticed a massive, glaring gap in the regional market for specialized high-end tools and personalized dedicated consulting for small independent construction crews. The big box stores simply didn't care about the little guys at all. I gathered every ounce of courage I had and started making phone calls from a cheap burner phone. I reached out to some of my dad's oldest, most trusted suppliers, the exact same loyal people that Mark had callously cut off to save a few pennies on his quarterly reports. At first, they were extremely hesitant to talk to me. I was just a broke girl washing dishes in a diner. But when they heard the raw determination in my voice, when they heard my dad's exact philosophy echoing in my business pitch, they actually started to listen. I managed to convince one major supplier, an old friend of my dad named Mr. Henderson, a grumpy but deeply fair man of 60 years old, to take a massive leap of faith on me.
Mr. Henderson agreed to front me a small initial inventory of highly specialized power tools entirely on credit, based purely on my father's good name and my solid business plan. It was a massive financial risk for him, and an even bigger one for me. I took my shoebox of diner savings and rented a tiny, incredibly rundown warehouse space on the absolute worst industrial outskirts of the city. It had absolutely no heating, a severely leaky roof that dripped on my desk, and a serious rat problem. But it was mine. I started aggressively cold calling independent contractors, guys I specifically remembered from my teenage days working the cash registers. I offered them significantly better wholesale prices and top-tier equipment. But most importantly, I offered them genuine respect and personalized customer service. I personally delivered the heavy tools out of the rusty trunk of Chloe's beat-up old sedan. I was working insane 18-hour days, scrubbing greasy pots at the diner all night and hustling selling construction tools all day. That entire first year was pure, unadulterated agony. I was constantly teetering on the terrifying edge of total bankruptcy, constantly sleep-deprived, and constantly terrified of failing. But slowly, incredibly slowly, word of mouth started to spread through the local construction sites. The rugged contractors really liked dealing directly with me instead of a faceless corporate desk jockey. They deeply appreciated that I actually understood their daily job site needs and didn't treat them like just another annoying transaction. My initial profit margins were terrifyingly slim, but I rigorously reinvested every single dollar right back into the growing business. I finally quit my job at the diner, hugging Brenda and Chloe so tightly I thought they would pop, swearing to them I would never, ever forget what they did to keep me alive. I proudly moved into a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment directly above my noisy warehouse. It really wasn't much to look at, but to me, it felt like a luxurious castle compared to sleeping on the cold streets. By year 3, things started to accelerate at a blinding pace. I had successfully negotiated and secured exclusive regional distribution rights for several premium, highly sought-after tool brands. I carefully hired a small dedicated team, mostly consisting of the experienced older people who had been unfairly and cruelly let go by Mark's aggressive downsizing. They were fiercely loyal, incredibly hardworking, and completely shared my customer-first vision. We weren't just selling hardware anymore. We were actively building a supportive community, which was exactly what my dad had always originally intended. We rapidly expanded our operations into heavy building materials, offering highly tailored, precise delivery logistics for massive construction sites. My company's revenue was doubling. I was quietly but undeniably becoming a very serious heavyweight player in the local industrial supply industry, operating under a completely different corporate name, of course. I absolutely didn't want Mark to have any idea that I was the unseen ghost who was slowly, methodically eating into his market share. I religiously kept tabs on Mark's company through the local industry grapevine and gossip. It was an absolute, unmitigated disaster over there. His insanely aggressive corporate expansion and relentless cost-cutting measures had completely alienated all of their oldest, most reliable customers. He was treating his floor employees terribly, and his staff turnover rate was astronomically high. The physical quality of their store products had plummeted to embarrassing levels. He was bleeding massive amounts of cash every month, but his fragile, narcissistic ego was way too big to ever admit he was failing. He was desperately taking out massive high-interest bank loans to cover his operational losses, recklessly leveraging the very commercial properties my dad had worked so hard to pay off completely. Every single time I heard a new rumor about his growing struggles, a dark, deeply vindictive part of me smiled, but I forced myself to stay entirely focused on my own company's growth. I wasn't going to let petty revenge distract me from achieving total success. Year 4 was the absolute game changer for my life. A truly massive, multi-million-dollar commercial development project was publicly announced for the city center. It was the holy grail contract for supplying the entire construction fleet for the next 3 years. I knew for a fact that Mark would be bidding on it with absolute desperation. He desperately needed that massive cash injection to save his rapidly sinking ship from total bankruptcy. I spent 3 grueling weeks preparing my company's bid. I barely slept or ate. I ruthlessly crunched the numbers, negotiated relentlessly with my overseas suppliers for the best margins, and put together a comprehensive proposal that was lean, hyper-efficient, and mathematically unbeatable. I walked into that presentation room and pitched my heart out. When the development board officially announced that my company had won the exclusive contract, I actually broke down and cried in my office. It was the ultimate validation of years of blood, sweat, and silent tears. Losing that specific contract was the final, devastating nail in the coffin for Mark's crumbling company. The quiet industry rumors instantly turned into loud, blaring alarms. Major suppliers started aggressively demanding upfront cash payments from him, refusing him any credit. The local banks started getting extremely nervous about his leveraged assets. He had completely alienated absolutely everyone who could have possibly thrown him a lifeline. Meanwhile, my own business absolutely exploded in size and scope.
I had to urgently rent a massive, state-of-the-art new distribution center and hire 50 more full-time employees just to keep up with the demand. I was finally wealthy, truly and undeniably wealthy, but I never once forgot the stinging feeling of that cold wind on my face or the deep, burning insult of that crumpled $10 bill. I kept that exact bill professionally framed on my massive office desk as a daily, silent reminder of exactly where I came from and what I was truly capable of overcoming. 5 years. It had been exactly 5 long, hard years since I was thrown out of my home like worthless garbage. I was sitting in my sleek, modern corner office, calmly reviewing incredible quarterly financial reports. My executive assistant buzzed my desk intercom, her voice sounding a bit confused. "Sarah, there's a Mr. Robert Vance holding on line 1. He says it's incredibly urgent regarding a highly sensitive family matter." My heart completely stopped beating for a second. Robert Vance, 62 years old, was the senior, highly respected manager at the main branch of the bank my father had loyally used his entire life. He was our trusted family banker. I hadn't spoken a single word to him since the agonizing reading of that fraudulent will 5 years ago. My hands were actually physically shaking as I reached out and picked up the heavy phone receiver. "Hello, Robert," I said, trying desperately to keep my voice sounding professional and steady.
There was a very heavy, exhausted sigh on the other end of the secure line. "Sarah, it's really good to hear your voice after all this time. I'm calling you directly because I honestly didn't know who else to call. The financial situation here has reached a completely critical, unavoidable point." Robert sounded incredibly tired, entirely defeated by the situation. He gravely explained that Mark's entire corporate entity was officially in severe default. He had completely missed 3 consecutive massive loan payments, and the bank's board was aggressively initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings on all the commercial properties, including the beloved original flagship store my father had built with his own 2 hands. "He's completely bankrupt, Sarah," Robert said quietly, genuine sadness in his voice. "He's entirely drained every single account, remortgaged every possible physical asset, and the outstanding debt is absolutely astronomical. The bank is legally taking everything by the end of the week. I just thought you should know. Considering your father's incredible legacy is about to be publicly auctioned off in pieces to the highest corporate bidder." I sat there in total stunned silence, absorbing the crushing weight of his words. The beautiful empire my father spent 40 years meticulously building, completely destroyed in just 5 years by sheer greed, arrogance, and blinding incompetence. It was almost hard to believe.
I simply couldn't let my father's life work be sold off to strangers. Robert, I commanded with absolute authority, do not process that foreclosure. I am buying his entire debt in cash right now. Draft the papers. The next morning, I walked into the bank's executive boardroom. After 2 hours of signing documents, the massive wire transfer was confirmed. I officially owned everything. Just as Robert shook my hand, the heavy doors burst open. It was Mark, looking shockingly thin and completely desperate. He stopped dead when he saw me at the head of the table. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing here?" he demanded. I calmly reached into my purse, pulled out that framed $10 bill, and slid it across the glass. "I used this to buy a coffee, Mark, and then I built Apex Industrial Solutions, the company that just destroyed you," I said coldly. The color completely drained from his face as the horrifying realization hit him. You're Apex?" he whispered, collapsing into a chair. "Yes, and as of 10 minutes ago, I legally own all your defaulted collateral. The warehouses, the stores, everything Dad built. You are completely bankrupt, Mark. You have until 5 p.m. to clear out your pathetic belongings before my security escorts you out, and never contact me again." I proudly walked out of that boardroom without looking back. Over the next few months, I successfully merged the companies, beautifully restoring my father's proud legacy. Looking back at this entire insane journey, from crying alone on that freezing porch to confidently sitting in the executive boardroom, the absolute most valuable lesson I learned is that true, lasting power isn't ever just handed to you. It's brutally and meticulously forged in the intense, burning fire of deep hardship. My brother honestly thought he was completely burying me forever on that cold night, but his arrogant, greedy mind didn't realize I was a seed ready to grow into an unstoppable force. Have you ever had someone maliciously try to destroy your life, only for it to be the exact powerful push you needed to become your absolute best self? I would genuinely love to read all about your personal experiences in the comments down below. Until the next story.